up to lunch, we have Andrew Fielding. You've already seen a photo of one of his reconstructions of a Roman salt preparation. I promised that he'd talk about open pan to vacuum evaporators, but I'm not so sure there are many vacuum evaporators in this presentation there, Andrew. Andrew is a former project director here at the Lyons Salt Works. He's a professional archaeologist. He also runs, as he may well tell us, an outfit called EcoSal, which is promoting, as the name quite neatly suggests, promoting traditional salt-making processes in the UK. He's going to show us this magnificent presentation. The floor is all yours, Andrew.
Thank you very much. In my journey, having left here, I took part in a European project to link together traditional salt-making processes from Portugal through Spain through France into this country. The UK had to be part of that, otherwise they couldn't get regional funding from the Atlantic Fund. But of course we don't have any working salinas, so our part of the project was somewhat restricted. And every time we went to meetings, they said, oh yes, but the UK is different. But as a legacy of that, we set up EcoSal UK, a not-for-profit organisation, just to give a focus to try and promote the wider story of salt making in the UK. Now 45 minutes to do this is some ask. So there'll be no vacuum evaporators because I couldn't kind of fit those in. And I'm going to go from about 1500 to the present day. Partly because that's part of a research grant that Mike Neville and I are trying to put into the Arts and the Humanities Research Council, though we're not sure that we're going to be successful in that. To try and find new ways of researching and interpreting the historic processes. So part of what I'm trying to do is lifted from a draft from an Apple iBook format that I'm trying to assemble all of this documentary information and try and find new graphic ways to put the information over. Otherwise, we kind of use Calvert, and for 1,400 pages, we'd be just going, and this happened in this year, and so wrote this book, and then that happened, and then something else happened. So it's trying to get over in graphical formats, which is why I'm going to go backwards and forwards, because I've got some little 3D models that we can look at. So this is the title for the iBook. So it's Development of Salt Making, and it's looking at a whole variety of people, places, the connections between all those sites. Because what we found is that everybody who is working on their own site takes their own bit of information that they know something about, and then they go to previous publications and pick up a backstory from something that might have been written 50 or 60 years ago. And that story has been written from publications that themselves might be 50 or 60 years ago. And you get this inbuilt error that creeps in as everybody puts in a little bit of a summary of somebody else's summary of the history of salt making. So what we're trying to do is put all of that information together and look at its timeline and look at the people and then look at the connections between the people and the places to see how this industry has moved forward. So, MORAX, taxation system. These are various documented accounts, publications that you can go to put into a chronological order who wrote about what and when. And then the events that kind of influence from the decision makers, the parliamentary system that's evolving, and then what is happening at home and what's happening overseas that influences economic development, social history within the UK. Because otherwise you're just looking at how salt was made in one place. And that itself is being influenced by a whole range of other things. So you think about Brexit today and how that affects what's going on today. But if you put that into context with the Anglo-Spanish War, or the Cadiz expeditions, the Siege of La Rochelle, when suddenly salt is not being available to come into this country. So you end up either with no salt at all, or it acts as a kickstarter for something else to happen in this country that stimulates economic development. But as soon as the war's over, all of these people from overseas suddenly find they can sell it back to you, and that investment collapses because it suddenly becomes cheaper to import something that is more cheaply priced than what you can make yourself. So all of these factors influence how a business is run. So we're trying to look at that kind of business economic activity as much as the actual processes themselves. And of course, in those early days, we're not even a country. We're lots of different countries and lots of different regions. And what's going on in Lancashire is quite far removed from what's going on in London. So the worshipful company of salters, even today, they just deal with the business of salt making becomes chemicals. They have no interest in what's going on around the rest of the country. But all of the names and the people are all influencing what's going on, because all of these people, Thomas Lance, he's a Cheshire person, William Brownrigg, you talk about Dr. Brownrigg, but he's not your ordinary doctor, because he lives in a bloody huge mansion called Crossway Hall, and he's working for Lord Lowther in the northwest of England, who has property in Ireland and businesses in London, and all of that's affecting his thinking about making money for himself within places like Whitehaven and Maryfield. So the geographical spread of all of these documents by date is fantastic for putting into an interactive iBook, because you can see all the places, and then these become interactive hyperlinks between this page, and you press on page 85, and you can then go directly to Habington's description of salt making in the West Midlands, a lot of which he wrote in the Tower of London because he was a Catholic, and he was seen as being like a Muslim or something, as a terrorist within this country. And other members, his group, for instance, took part in the Gunpowder Plot and themselves were executed. But they had salt-making businesses within the West Midlands. And that influences a whole range of things, both locally and nationally. But then from the hyperlinks within the pages, you can actually go back to the wonderful online resources. So you don't have to publish everything within this book. You can get the World Wide Web to pull down the documents that you're referring to in your book. And at EcoSal, we've created an interactive Google map, which is accessible from our web pages and blog site pages, so that each one of these little icons, these are wreck sites of ships that have carried salt. When you click on those or choose the menu on the left-hand side, it pulls all of those documents up in chronological order. Documents are little pinholes, sites are little balloons. Salt-making sites are the little yellow sites. Salt-glazed potteries are cups. Nature reserves that are based on salt marshes or so on little picnic tables. The rock salt mines are the little balloons in purple, and then there are subsidence areas which are their own little icon. And they themselves have got links to online resources, the original documents that describe what's gone there, or archaeological reports that are available online. And of course, a lot of this appears not just in the documentary records of sites, but salt making was taxed, and it was a business. And there's a fantastic book, like Calvert, published in 1934 by Edward Hughes, a lecturer in modern history at the University of Manchester. Studies in Administration and Finance, 1558 to 1825, with special reference to the history of salt taxation in England. He wanted to publish a book on salt tax, but he was told that people might think it was boring. So he gave it this title instead. And that links why people were making salt, where did the money come from, why was it being taxed, how did they collect it, how did they record who was doing what, and where. And that old adage, follow the money. It's sometimes you can get better insights from these economic documents than you can in trying to find the actual sites themselves. So let's start in 1556 with Agricola, and this is our replica at Lyons Saltworks of an Agricola salt pan that we did at the same time that we had the Roman salt pan that you saw in the earlier presentation. And then I have my warning. Everybody publishes a book on salt making, and they use Agricola's little line drawing because it's a cipher. It's about salt making. And when you see the other slides that I'll show later on, we haven't got hardly any sites that look like this. But you'll see in all publications, it's just a quick and easy, copyright-free, this is how salt was made in the 16th century. Now, let's see whether some of this technology works. Now, let's try and find it. Okay, open. What it does, though, in the document is describe salt making as a process from brine well to finished product. So we collected our brine in our brine well and we carried it through to a salt house. And then the illustrations go on to describe and show you what a salt house looked like. It has a brine reservoir, it has faggots of wood, it has the salt master's wife if he hasn't got an assistant to help him make salt. It's got all the different tools that he uses to take the brine out of the salt pan, put it into the moulds to make these baskets, cones of salt. And then they describe how you actually put a salt pan together. The hole that you dig to sink the furnace in, the different sizes depending on whether it's burning wood or faggots, the support mechanisms for the small iron plates that have little metal straps to stop them from buckling in the heat. If you see the salt pans here, you'll see the effect of the heat on an iron pan and how they have to be constantly maintained and managed. But he also, within chapter 12, talks about bleaching processes and other salt-on-salt processes. It isn't just a pan process. So, let's get rid of that one.
It's one omission. Those of us in the front row can see the presence of a bucket of blood
Yes.
in the Agricola drawing. What's the function of the bucket of blood?
It's to coagulate all of the impurities, and you use eggs of white, like using finings for winemaking, to pull together, the protein pulls together all of the muck within the vine. So, we then have contemporary descriptions about salt making. As people go on their travels, John Leyland nicks things from Camden, Daniel Defoe nicks things from Leyland and Camden and throws in some other things that he's got from other people. And these are little snapshots. Celia finds and has her trips around from Lymington and up to Cheshire. She invests in salt making within Cheshire because she has connections by family to the estates within Cheshire. So Leyland describes Nantwich, Middlewich, Northwich and Puddington, that well-known site of Puddington. And here on the Wirral by the coast, and that's probably because he knows the Massey family that are actually related to the Masseys of Gunny Massey. And he probably goes and stays there. It's another link to kind of Catholic family involvement in salt making. But all providing little snapshots at a period of time. But very few descriptions. And Brownrigg talks about if only people had actually concentrated on the processes of salt making rather than doing these descriptions of sites, then the methods of making salt making would have got so much better much earlier. On the left-hand side is a description for a furnace and a salt pan by Mount, 1565. And he's going around to Blythe in the northeast, in Southampton and the east coast. And he's describing differences between pickle pans and salt pans, and how there's a brine tank with 4 salt pans. So you have your fuel would be stacked up in the middle, and you feed the furnaces on 4 sides for making your different salts. But anybody that's bothered to use the illustration on the left just says this salt pan is difficult to decipher. But we're trying to find out exactly. Obviously, this was built and somebody operated it. So how did it work? That influenced the way other salt pans were put together. 1566. Shortage of salt, and they start a new site in West Wales, at Aberdyfi, and the estuary that we don't quite know where it was. And this has the same kind of arrangement of pickle pans and salt pans. So they're strengthening their seawater by pre-boiling it and then feeding the strong brine into a salt pan to make their salt. Goodness. Maybe it might be. Shall I just do all the models at the end rather than go through? Because I've got little models for all of these that I can show you later. And this is Trife Melbourne, almost in the middle of nowhere, certainly in the 16th century. But they carried their salt pan by ship from Kent in order to bring it across here. And again, you've got the effects of an estuary concentrating seawater within a shallow sea inlet area. So the brine is stronger, or the seawater is stronger, and you're not using as much energy. But this is a mixture of solar evaporation by digging large salt fields for brine water to strengthen it before you feed it into a salt pan. We'll see that in the model later on.
Sorry, just interrupt that. I would have expected that with fresh water coming down the river, an estuary would have been more dilute than the sea.
it gets very complicated with estuaries, depending on the configuration of the mouth, where the salt water is coming through, how big the channels are, whether you're getting intermixing of fresh water with seawater. But in these areas here, you've got salt marshes on the edge. So you're getting this high tides, which is flooding these areas with seawater. And then in the neap tides, it's not flooding. So you're getting a warming effect. In other areas where you've got these large sands, in the summer, as the seawater goes out, the salt water is left in the sand, and the next incoming seawater flows over the top, re-dissolves the salt that's formed in the top of the sand, and you get a hypersaturated solution of salt that gets pushed into the salt marsh. So it's a configuration of the geology and the geography, as well as the seawater. And we'll see later on, just because you've got seawater doesn't mean you've got salt making, because it's the shape of the coastline, and then how close that coastline is to your fuel. Because there's no, you can have all the seawater in your light, but if you haven't got any coal or wood to burn to boil it, it's a complete waste of time. So lots and lots of things. Each one of these little topics I'm going to show you is an hour's lecture in its own right. So rushing through, I'm afraid. Hugh Platt, this comes back then to, there are periods in which people they're travelling abroad, because he's looking at salt marshes here in France. He's looking at the hillocks where salt marshes and where sand washing, where you take the salt out of the sand and then wash the salt out of it and then ditch the sand. That waste sand actually acts as a fertiliser. He's looking at how you can use these waste products to fertilise soil. He's making balls of coal to burn better than the cheap coal that they have access to. It's stimulating how a crossover between burning wood and burning coal and the shape of your fireplace and how your chimney is constructed, so that you burn this new product of coal more efficiently to evaporate something or even heat your house. And that then feeds into smoke pollution in London, because people are burning coal rather than wood, and you get all this nasty black smoke from this horrible cheap coal that they're burning. There's all kinds of social connections that are going on at the same time. And he says, in conditions of extreme want, every poor man dwelling by the seaside could try, in what sunny days, to make a sufficient store of salt for his individual consumption by filling basins, dripping pans, shallow pans, or any other empty and shallow vessel with seawater, and setting them in the sun in hot sand and in high places. How revolutionary that you cut out the person making the salt, and you go down to the sea, you collect your own seawater, and you make salt for yourself. And here's my reconstruction of a salina. This is online as a salina in the garden. These are little seed trays. You start off with 20 litres of seawater, 2 to 3%. When each one of these trays has evaporated by 50%, you fill 4 seed trays from your original 8. And then you fill this back up with fresh seawater. When your 4 trays here have evaporated by 50%, you fill 2 trays up with it. And when that's evaporated by 50%, you fill 1 salt seed tray. And each time you're moving the brine across a graduated concentration in an industrial process. So all the coastal salt evaporating salinas all operate like this. And then in a really nice August day, at the end of about 2 days, you can harvest your own sea salt. Um, 1571, this is salt works at Port Ino. It's the bottom of the caravan park, excavated it was published in 1998, excavated earlier on. But 1571 is one of the first references on the left-hand side. Again, it's somebody having to pay tax on salt. So you've got no reference really of the salt house at this date, but you know that they're making salt here because somebody's collecting money from it. Some vote. 1612, let's come back then. I'm going to do a little sequence on sand washing because you've got a big salt pan here at the Lyons Salt Works. Essentially, you're concentrating brine, pumping out the ground, and then you're evaporating it. The salt from sand is a slightly more complicated process. This is a description upon the banks of the Solway Firth in June and July. Country people gather up the sand within the flood mark, bringing it to land and laying it in great heaps. Thereafter, they make the salt spring water and cast it upon the sand with a certain device, causing the water to run through the sand into a hollow pit, purposefully made to receive the water, which water being boiled in a little vessel of lead, there is made thereof good white salt, after the temperance of the weather. This place is called Salt Coast. And that process is going on the whole of the east coast of England, on the south coast, around the Fylde and on the Solway coasts. In Waynflete St Mary in Lincolnshire, an excavation by McAvoy actually excavated one of these structures. So you gather up your sand that's got sea salt in it because the high tides left it there, you collected it, you stacked it up. You do that in the summer. You do the salt making in the autumn. It's an autumn operation. And you fill this box here that's got turf at the bottom with this wet, salt-enriched sand. You pour water through it. It runs through a pipe into this collecting clay-lined tank. And then this becomes a stronger brine, which you then take out and you put into your salt pan, lead pan, and boil it up. Processes vary around the country. This is the field monument that's the only one that's left at Waynflete. This whole area probably extended to about 1.5 kilometres. And the little mounds here are the waste sand that, having washed the salt out of the sand, you dig out, pile it up, and bring fresh sand into it. So very distinctive, but different areas operated slightly differently. This is farther north at Marsh Chapel in Lincolnshire, and this area of salt making is now something like 4 kilometres inland from the present day coastline. So the original coastline is down this road here, and there's Marsh Chapel, little kink at the top. Tide comes in, tide goes out, lots of sandbanks. You collect this wet or dry sand with the salt in it, you pile it up, wash the salt out, you make salt, get rid of the sand, and you gradually make fresh land. And every time you get rid of this sand, it forms more land. The tide area here is still coming in and going out, but you're creating little pockets of dry land. So you put your salt coats on the top of it so that you can get the wet sand in more closely. As you move farther east, your sheep and your cows come onto this land, the enriched grazed land that Platt describes earlier on. And gradually you win all of this land down here, and all of the property boundaries extend in parallel lines as the landowner on this side is moving and following the land that's been created anew from the North Sea. This is an aerial photograph, and on the right hand side is what the land looks like now. When you're actually walking on it, there are these little humps and bumps there, otherwise you wouldn't really know. And that's a reconstruction in paper. This is from a thesis by Theresa Maybury. But in France, at Mont Saint-Michel, at Veynes near Avranches, they've actually reconstructed one of these houses, and they do demonstrations of collecting sand. So if you're on your holidays in northern France, it's well worth a visit. They do demonstrations. This is a 19th century engraving showing the pans, the hearth, the firewood over the top. This is the equivalent of, you put the sand in here, there's the pipe taking the brine into this salt house, comes in through the end wall. At the back there's collected strong brine in barrels, and then you put the brine into the salt pans and evaporate it to make the white salt. The other, go back to this one, Theresa Maybury found a lot of information about this from wills and inventories, again a paper document, because families were leaving their salt making tools, their hats, their rakes, their baskets, peat that they had cut and not used when they died were inherited. And so you can follow the families and the places where these people live. And Jonathan Cass has done the same for the Flint area, and come with the same kind of documentary archive. So A different process is still used today as a protected industrial process in Japan. They collect seawater here by hand and carry it up a walkway. And there are salt fields. Sand, rather than the tide coming in and leaving the salt to crystallise in the sand, you spread your salt water over prepared flat areas. And this is bringing the salt water from the sea into a storage vessel in the middle of this salt sand field, and then you throw the salt water over the sand. The sun and the wind evaporate the water off. You scrape the sand together, put that in a pile, wash it through with fresh water. The raking is important because it doubles and trebles the surface area for the evaporation to take place. But here you're not wasting any of the sand, you're reusing it. So you don't have to dig it out and put it somewhere else. This is a recycling process. So that's their sand washing box, and then the brine goes into a salt pan and is evaporated in the traditional way. James I visited Nantwich, 1670, published in Hall's History of the Town. It's very much like a royal visit today. At the bottom of on the right-hand side, he says, after His Majesty's gracious inquiry among the poor drawers of many things touching the nature of the brine and how they proceeded to convert it into salt, most princely rewarding them with his own hand. So he actually goes around with somebody carrying money. Says they were clothed more than a shirt and with great cheerfulness. I bet they were when the king came. And Thomas Wilbraham said, we've all got to make salt because we've got a visitor coming. This is the interpretation of the documents in Nantwich about where the salt holdings were. Again, I've got a little model of this. It's put together by the late George Twigg, the Walling lands. And two of these sites have been excavated. The first one, Wood Street, by Robina MacNeil, has these salt ships, wooden logs hollowed out for the brine to be put in before it was then put into the boiling pans. But of course, these inland sites, the benefit here is the salt is stronger than seawater. It's still not saturated solution, which is why they can't make it continuously all year round, and why they had to restrict access to the brine pits and the number of pans in which salt was made. So this brine site excavated by Robina is dated by dendrochronology to the 12th century, and we'll see later on that there's a description in 1675 where Dr. Branker from Middlewich, a teacher, is visiting the salt house that the school owns, and his description is identical to the excavated site from the 12th century. There's a big flurry of these maps. This is the Northwich one. Again, I've put together a model of how that one looks today. And Droitwich has the same one. Recognise the little style of the houses here. These are the salt houses. There's the brine pit in the middle. Again, this was excavated. And underneath all of the mud, you can see all the waterlogged deposits like you get in Nantwich. And this one actually has a public support and a brine well. Again, earlier, but a whole sequence then of brine wells. These are easier to interpret than the Roman ones, because the Roman ones weren't quite so substantial. And so rather than digging a new well somewhere else in the Roman period, they knew that's where the brine was, and the later salt makers just obliterated it and put their versions on the top. But these things are very substantial structures. The brine pit is on the right-hand side, and the pump structure is on the left. So 1631, we're back up with Christopher Lowther in Whitehaven, and he's experimenting with these different salt pans. tells you 4 pans will draw every 24 hours, will make 20 bushels per pan, tells you the grate sizes, the gears or whatever. And here's his description. It's a long building, it's a warehouse at this end. These are the furnaces opposite each other with little steps between a set of pair of pans. You've got 2 pans here, steps between a pair of pans, steps. On this side here, the 2 storage areas are actually for sea salt and bay salt. So using at one point in time a salt-on-salt process where the docks are importing continental salt, the cheap salt, but it's white salt, dirty, and you redissolve that in a storage tank and feed it into your salt pans. So you're using less fuel to evaporate a strong brine, but you're not having to waste the time of getting the seawater up to concentration levels where it will evaporate. Cross Canonby, I've left off the actual, it's all overgrown of the actual site, but out, if you go there at low tide, this is a well structure for collecting the seawater. And we'll see when we look at the end of the St. Monin site, that though this is now maybe 300 metres out to sea, when the site was constructed, this was dry land. And this was taking a well down so that the seawater would fill it up. And at this end here, there's a pipe, and that pipe would go right inland to where the salt making site was. So you'd have a salt, marshy, sandy dune area. Tide would come in, fill this up, and the water would find its own level. So that at the bottom of the pipe, where the saltworks was, there would be seawater flowing from out to sea, and you would pump it up from the actual saltworks rather than having to go right way out to the sea, because you didn't want to be washed away in the floods. And on the right-hand side, this is John Smith, who was a salt officer, and his tomb at Cross Canonby Church shows him sat at his desk filling out his ledgers for the taxation of salt that he was collecting in that area. That's a kind of unique monument of a salt officer. William Brereton went on his travels in 1635, and he describes going and visiting sites in South Shields. And on the right-hand side, he says it's the most dainty new salt works, absolutely the most complete works I ever saw, with furnaces placed in the same manner as my brother Booth's. And his brother was George Booth of Dunamassy. It's the same family linked to the Puddington site on the Wirral. And describing how the pans were laid out and the size of them and how they were operated. This one took seawater and boiled it in the first pan to concentrate it and fed it into a second pan, which was heated by the waste heat from boiling the raw seawater in the first pan. So it had an energy recovery system built into the process in 1635. And then this long continuity in the south coast, in Southwold, again because of the estuary, you get a combined concentration inside the sand dune of salt making. But that goes right the way up to the modern day. On the right hand side you can see a wind pump for raising the seawater from a shallow inlet where the salt concentrated seawater is stored. And in this case, in the end of the 19th century, it's pumping to a saltwater bath. So you're using the seawater as a medicinal, therapeutic, holiday, recreational use rather than purely for salt making. Royal Society published lots of papers over a number of years. 1675, Robert Hooke, he lives down near the Isle of Wight and Southampton, and he describes in great detail combination of solar evaporation to strengthen your seawater and then feeding it into a brine system before putting it into a pan house. And then you've got a traditional little pan to make your salt. Huge area of salt making in this area. And these kind of pans were used for this size in the Midlands and in Cheshire. But because of the advantageous things here, the developments, the salt pans in Cheshire become much bigger. And that's a relationship, I think, between using brine from rock salt as opposed to brine from seawater. And then 1670, the game changer, starts really with the rock salt that we saw earlier being discovered. And it wasn't really used a great deal in the early days. In fact, Northwich and Droitwich were very small producers compared to all the sea salt producers, because Northwich and Cheshire couldn't furnish the fishing industry because it wasn't a port and it wasn't associated with the Royal Navy. He wanted to salt beef and salt fish. Huge kickstart at this period for feeding slaves in the West Indies. All the big landowners are growing tobacco and bringing sugar and all these things. They needed to feed people on islands that couldn't sustain them. And they were using huge amounts of salt to make all of these salted products. So a lot of it from the very early days, from after 1670, started to be exported. And another economic treatise, 1682, by John Collins, is talking about salt making, but he's talking about how it's going to, improvements in salt making would aid the fishing industry. Rather than importing salt, we could make our own salt that was more suited to salt fish, then we wouldn't have to import it from overseas. And he describes 5 different ways of making salt in this period. Again, I haven't got time to go into all of these. And then by 1725, originally Robert Stainer and then Richard Lane, they break the monopoly of the medieval centres in Droitwich. They'd seen the developments in Northwich and how brine didn't just exist inside the town centre that was controlled by merchants. You could go out from these town centres and dig your own well. And you could make a lot of money. On the bottom there of Nash's History of Worcester, the last says, henceforth the old pit became of no value at all, which some years before was worth £5,000 per annum, and esteemed the surest property a man could enjoy. So people who had traditional rights of salt making in these town centres lost a lot of money when the entrepreneurs like Richard Lane went out into the countryside and put a new well down and just started making salt. But he was, in 1732, complaining about all the salt that was going to Ireland because the duty was different over there. And it was better and cheaper for the Royal Navy to get salt beef from Ireland than it was in this country because of the taxation system. So ships from this country were going to Ireland and buying their salt beef and salt fish to stock their ships up. And it starts a huge debate about what the taxation of salt was for and who was benefiting and who was missing out. So the size and scale of all of these salt pans, this is a survey of coasts and harbours by Edward Dunn. He's actually looking for new harbours for shipping, but in doing so around all these creeks, he actually plots where all the salt pans are. This is at Lymington. And the St Barb's Museum in Lymington has little models in their museum. This is like Robert Hooke's one on the right-hand side, and there's a little sketch by Thomas Rowlandson about 1784 showing these small lead salt pans in Lymington. So quite different from what was evolving eventually in Northwich. This is a document by Wilkins, who was a landowner around the Bewley estate, and this document's in the University of Glasgow. By accidents of faith. This is one of the first areas where the Artemia, the brine shrimp, is actually categorised because they only survive in specific locations of salinity and became very prevalent within these saline sites. So we come on to Brownrigg, 1748. He has a huge list of all of the previous documents that he's looked at the Royal Society. And finds that there's ways in which it could be involved. And everybody then uses these dreadful reconstruction of a curriculum. But he's pointing out the errors of what the differences are about exposing the salt pan to dust and to smoke from the furnace because there's no wall between. But some people, I think some people just use the illustrations rather than, they're probably more homely than the engineering drawings that he's producing. I mean, that's a technical drawing of a salt pan, but it's not, I don't know, do you mean it's a bit clinical, isn't it? It's not something, but that, of that period, is the type of salt pan that he was saying is the best way to make salt. And at the same time, 1771, we've still got these little windmills operating for the salt pans in the south of England. So it's becoming a real difference between technology and economic change in the north of England, and people in the south of England carry on doing things the way they always used to do them. St Monans and the Scottish ones, there's a huge cluster of salt pans in Scotland, partly because once these sites were abandoned, there was no other economic good use for the sites, so they were just left. If they'd been real centres of the economy, the land would have had a value, they'd been demolished and something else would have taken their place, but they just get left behind. St Monans has got a range of salt pans, and brine is brought in, you'll see this in the model later. There's a primary collection tank over here with a pipe going to a secondary collection site here. There's a pipe that goes underground where the windmill is pumping the brine up and then distributing back into the site here. Unfortunately, sometime in the early years of sewage construction, the local council put a sewer pipe right the way through here, disconnecting the salt pans and where the brine comes from and the windmill itself. Preston Island, again, you can go and look at this, but unfortunately the island was enlarged when pulverised flue ash from the Longannet power station needed somewhere to be dumped, and they expanded the island by just laying it all around. So you go for a walk around the outside of it, but you can't walk to the salt pan itself because the site's too caustic. It was inundated by seawater and turned into a slurry. But there are 3 plant houses, again, I can show you those quickly in a second. So this is as far as I'm going to go this morning with Kreisel, Christoph Kreisel, 1776. Because everybody had been using their salt pans and their hearths in the way in which their fathers and their grandfathers had. And he comes along and says that he thinks that he can make better advantage of burning the coal in a more efficient way. And he's reusing the waste heat by ducting the flues under the salt pans. He's doing that in one of these pans somewhere here down towards Whitton Brook. This is published in German. There are extracts of it in Calvert. So you can kind of follow through. We're looking to retranslate this and actually go back and look at how it actually works and how much notice anybody actually took. Because sometimes you find that though somebody's written about it, isn't necessarily implemented by anybody else on the ground. And the variety, we mentioned about things that we weren't talking about during this conference, is the use of salt. Because we're all talking about making it, there was an awful difference between the types of salt that could be made. And in the 1930s in Winsford, the salt councillor in Winsford gives a talk, and he says that of the salt pans in Winsford, he'd come along newly to this, and he felt there was ways in which he could improve on the process. And he said, I rapidly realised that actually the development of the open pan system to make he's got this is from Calvert again, 6 different types of salt was probably the most efficient and the most economical way of skilled operators turning the strong brine into different types of salt that were used by different people for butter making, for cheese making, for salting fish, for salting meat. They all wanted different size crystals because they were using them in different ways. You can see the difference between the sea salt on the bottom right-hand side of my slide, which is large and clumpy, and the little round ones that come out of a vacuum evaporator. And the vacuum evaporators can make square cubes or they can make round cubes. And again, it depends on the crystal size and what the customer wants. So, I'm at the end of the time. I'll have the computer obviously here today. If you want to look at all the models, I'll run through them for you.
I was just going to say, and because we have lunchtime, this is an excellent opportunity to run through these. I also promised that you would end with salt evaporators, and you did indeed. So thank you very much. What I'm going to suggest is, because lunch is already served downstairs, is that we just have one quick question for Andrew, but he's certainly going to be around during lunchtime, showing some of these splendid animations. It's one quick question for Andrew. Will you all start?
You mentioned that very early on in your timeline, you showed 1565 first licensing of salt works, and then a century later, 1665, foundation of the Royal Society, 1670, first rock salt. Two very, very brief questions. One was, what was licensed, and was there taxation? And two, is there a causal link between the founding of the Royal Society, which you referred to 2 or 3 times, and the discovery of rock salt?
The first license is to Thomas Seller, and it's because we're bringing in a German salt maker, because the government felt that there were ways to improve things. And all of these monopolies and licenses were ways in which the administrators within the country could control who was making what. So if you wanted to raise money, then you gave a license to somebody who paid you for making salt, and you stopped anybody else who didn't have that license from making it. So it's a control mechanism for the industry. And if you read Hughes, it's a fascinating arrangement that changes by the decade, depending on who was in and out of favour and whether these systems worked. Because if you had enough money, you could buy the rights to make anything, patents, and that stopped other people from doing it. There are a whole cluster of Royal Society of people investigating the salt making thing. What it does is inquiring minds trying to understand things. And the reason why there are more inland works than there are coastal ones is that they didn't really understand where the brine was coming from. Because they're asking people, at one stage they thought there was as it were, a tunnel from the sea coming in underneath the West Midlands and North Yorkshire. So it was taking seawater out of the ground because there was a tunnel coming in through. They didn't understand where it was coming from. So they start to ask everybody the same questions. How strong is your brine? How well does it flow? Where do you think it comes from? How strong it is? And then things like, what quality is it? Because they're looking to see what difference your salt making is compared to the imported salt. Is it bay salt or whatever? Bay salt was the standard, so you could say it was finer than that, it was stronger than that, it was weaker, all this kind of stuff. And there are interesting little things, odd little sentences. For instance, everybody says, Northwich made all of this salt. But again, it was local until transport. I hope Mike Neville will come on to this. The actual distribution from this area, Cheshire only becomes dominant with the Navigation Acts and shipping for bulk cargoes. Because why would you make salt in St Maimons when a ship will come with 500 tons at half the price that you're making it locally? And what it does in St Maimons is that it puts out of business the collieries because they're selling cheap coal that they otherwise couldn't sell. They're selling it to the salt makers, and they're supplying their own salt makers, and they're supplying the fishing industry. When the fishing industry buys a cheap imported product, it puts the salt makers out of work and it puts the collieries out of work. But their profit is in selling all the rubbish they can't otherwise sell. But in Droitwich, for instance, it kind of says, where do they're importing salt from Gloucester. Do you sell your salt to Gloucester? And they said, well, we don't sell our salt as far south as Gloucester. So you would think Droitwich, but again, they're landlocked until the canals are constructed and you can get into the River Severn. You can't get it down the river. So you're relying on pack horses and things distributing it. It's that economic model, that what's going on around the country, that influences, and these questions are beginning to be asked in that little story of papers.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that's an excellent place to end because it highlights just the sheer fluctuations in the salt industry, which is how you started talking about, for instance, things like wars and political events and restrictions on imports. It also is a perfect lead-in to this afternoon's paper from Mike, which will open by talking about transport. So we now break for lunch for half an hour. Please enjoy yourselves and mix and mingle. And thank you once again to Andrew.